Hey, welcome to the first episode of Starman. This is a show I've wanted to do for a while, where I basically talk about game stuff. Sometimes reviews, sometimes lectures, sometimes not even strictly about games. Okay, so for our first episode, I want to talk about Mario and Sonic. See, I used to not always be into retro games. My first real taste of retro gaming was when I got a Wii, and I bought a lot of old classics on Nintendo's eShop. Mega Man was pretty cool, but I thought most of the games didn't really hold up too well. They were clunky, frustrating, and ultimately not worth playing. Newer games are just better because they've had 20-something years to iron out all of those problems. That's how I thought, anyways. But then I watched a video that changed my life. It was Egoraptor's Sequelitis. He shined a new light on retro gaming for me and taught me that it was really just a matter of perspective. After watching his video, I went back and played a bunch of those eShop classics again. Castlevania, Zelda, Kirby, Zelda 2. I was surprised to find that these games had a lot more quality to them than I had thought. I've heard the argument that you have to give a special pass for old games. Like you have to hold them to a different standard and accept shortcomings due to their age. And I don't think that's true. You obviously have to deal with technical limitations, both in visuals and the kinds of games you're able to make, but good game design is ageless. It exists in a vacuum. Again, Mega Man is a perfect example of this. These games are old, but they don't feel like they've aged a day. The controls and physics are airtight, and the structure of the game may be simple, but not at all in a bad way. They're games that knew how to make the most of their limitations, and have nearly flawless design at their core. And that's really the key here. I now believe those are the two qualities that will dictate whether or not a game truly becomes a classic, if it accepts its limitations, and if it's built on a foundation of great design. And I feel those are things that the original Super Mario Bros. Did better than any other game on the NES. Now let me be clear. I do not think that Super Mario Bros. Is the best game on the system, because it's not. There's some stiff competition for that title. But in terms of which game has amazing design in spite of its limitations, then yeah, Super Mario Bros. Is king. And the limitations here are both technical and from inexperience. Let me explain. See, the NES is kind of a headache to develop for. It runs on assembly, and if you don't know anything about programming languages, just know that's like trying to paint with a box of crayons. Plus, the console has so many obtuse and just plain asinine limitations. Like that it has a hard sprite limit of 64 sprites. You can only have 64 character sprites on screen at any one time. Which doesn't sound too bad on paper, but know that sprites on the NES are only 8 pixels wide. So Mega Man here is actually 9 sprites, plus one more for his face. So just the playable character alone takes up 10 of those 64 sprites. And you can only have up to 8 sprites in any horizontal row. Any more than that, and those sprites just don't get drawn to the screen. You know how some NES games have sprite flickering? Well, that flickering is actually added by the developers. It's the game rotating which sprites get dropped each frame in order to try and fix this limitation. That's right, that thing that looks like a glitch is actually an intentional design choice. Let that sink in for a sec. The point that I'm trying to make is that the NES is just a nightmare to program for. Making 8-bit games back then versus now is no comparison, because even the smallest things were so much harder back then. And now let's take a look at Super Mario Bros., the launch title of the NES, from a company that was relatively new to game development, at a time when gaming as a whole was still in its infancy. By all accounts, this game should be terrible. It should feel super dated and clunky and just be a mess. But it actually holds up amazingly well. Why is that? Well, going back to what I said earlier, it's because Nintendo knew their limitations. Not just technical, but skill-wise as well. They knew they weren't ready to make a game like Mario 3 or Kirby's Dream Land. I mean, they couldn't even figure out how to have the levels scroll backwards yet. But they embraced these shortcomings and picked design choices that worked with them. Now compare this to the first Sonic game. Again, by all accounts, this game should be better. It's newer and has more powerful hardware. But, and I'll just rip this band-aid right off, the game kinda sucks. I'm sorry, but it does. But why exactly? What is it about this technically inferior and far uglier game that makes it better designed than this clearly superior one? Well, there are several reasons. First and most noticeable are the controls. It's interesting to note that Mario and Sonic actually have very similar controls. They're both momentum-based, building up speed as you push down the button. They both take a second to stop, and they both jump higher if you hold the button longer. But this really is a case of subtle nuances making all the difference. Mario controls are just tighter overall and feel more responsive. He reaches his max speed faster, stops faster, and has more control in the air. You can run off a platform at max speed and decide to nope out and land back on the platform safely. You can't do that in Sonic. His controls just feel sluggish in comparison, almost slippery. His max running speed is way faster, and at those speeds you really don't have the same kind of control in the air. This, combined with his slow startup, make platforming a lot trickier. It doesn't come naturally like it does in Mario. Plus, unlike later Mario games, Sonic's momentum is affected by slopes. You try to start moving up a slope and Sonic moves painfully slow. This all adds up and makes Sonic just not as much fun to control because you don't feel as in control. The next big factor is level design, and this is what I was talking about with knowing their limitations. Levels in the original Super Mario Bros. Can only scroll one direction, left to right, but they embraced this. All of the levels are designed to be rather straightforward. Since you can only ever reach any given part of a level from one direction, they could have tighter and more focused level design. You always know where to go, know where the danger is coming from, and know that dropping below the bottom of the screen is death. It's simple, but it's consistent and it works. Whereas levels in Sonic the Hedgehog can scroll in every direction. Left, right, up, down, you can go anywhere.
Up and down and all around.
Levels have branching paths, levels zigzag, jumps can lead to bottomless pits. It's a mess. Take the invincibility power-ups for example. In Mario, you get your first Starman in the first level. You hit this block and you get the power-up. Then it's a straight shoot where you can freely kill enemies and collect goodies. After that, you have a jump that you may get trapped in, but you can jump out if you do. Then you see another jump just like that, but this one leads to a bottomless pit. It's clear that death is down there. The game already gave you a little obstacle course to either run out of the star power or at least get used to the new physics. That way it's no problem to make this jump. Now, compare this to Sonic. You get a power-up in level 1-2 that's pretty obvious. This will be a lot of players' first time getting the invincibility. The music changes and increases your speed by a noticeable amount, and it's immediately followed by the trickiest platforming in the entire level. This honestly just feels like a trap. The game gives you a power-up that makes you run faster and allows you to be more reckless, then gives you a section that'll probably kill you for it. Not to mention the increased speed makes your air controls even worse, so this tricky platforming becomes even trickier. That's just antagonistic towards the player, and there are actually a lot of parts like that in this game. A lot of areas that seem kinda trolly, like this section with the springs. I never understood this. Sonic games tell you to run fast, then reprimand you if you do. It's like the game is punishing you for not having played it before. And this brings up another point, awareness. The sprites in Sonic are a lot bigger than those in Mario. Sonic himself takes up a much bigger percentage of the screen and moves a lot faster. This means you can not only see less of the level you're in at any given time, but you also have less time to react when some cheap obstacle or trap comes flying in from the side. In Super Mario Bros., even if you're booking it as fast as possible, you have a lot more time to see an obstacle and then react to it. This makes the game feel more fair. When you get hit, it's your fault, not because you were blindsided like in Sonic. I personally think that's a big part of why they gave Sonic his iconic ring system. It's a super forgiving health system, but it kinda has to be if you're getting hit unfairly all the time. Having a 2-hit power-up system like in Mario wouldn't work in Sonic games, since you'd be dying all the time from things that weren't your fault. All of these problems with Sonic the Hedgehog, the health system, the limited awareness, the poor level design, the frustrating controls, all come from a place of bad priority on the developer's part. Because this game is well made. It's well programmed, and it still looks and sounds amazing. But the problem is that Sega prioritized this stuff over everything else. Their top concern was that this game needed to be flashy, so that it could compete with Nintendo and the NES. Our levels are bigger and more complex. We have better physics with slopes. Look at those rings fly out of Sonic! So many objects can be on screen at once. And Sonic runs fast with the help of blast processing. But the irony is that those flashy choices ultimately hurt the game. And that's why Super Mario Bros., despite being technically inferior of the two, will always be more of a classic than Sonic the Hedgehog. It knows its limitations, and it works with them to make a game that is all around better designed. Sonic has crisper visuals, catchier music, and more robust levels. It's obvious that these were the main priority here. Sega believed that a game being fun comes from it looking and sounding fun. And I can't argue with that philosophy, it's a valid one. But Nintendo has always had a different philosophy. They believe that fun comes from a game that is fun to play. Everything else is a nice bonus, but that's the real focus in their eyes. And you can see that all the way back in their first Mario game on their first console. It's just fun to control Mario. It's fun to jump from platform to platform, fun to squish Goombas, and fun to collect things. So at the end of the day, Sonic may look and sound a lot better, but Mario is just more fun to play. And that's the bottom line, really. That's the good foundation in which the rest of the game stems from. In the words of Egoraptor himself,
Nintendo seems to treat like its major characters and their video games with such reverence, you know?
Yeah.
Like, why do you think Sonic doesn't receive that same treatment?
Because they don't know what to do with them. Because the first game they made wasn't even that great. And the whole thing is, oh, he runs fast. But running fast is not a good game mechanic.
Right.
There needs to be more than that.
I couldn't have said it any better. Thanks for watching.